We're live in just a second. Hello and welcome to Nerd. Are we live? I think we're live, yes. Hello and welcome to Nerd Church. This is the place where on Sundays we read through the Catholic lectionary and try not to be idiots about it. And Thursdays is the day where we get together and talk about the people who, in spite of the fact that they are listening to the Catholic lectionary on a regular basis, are kind of making choices about how they interpret the Bible and the Pope and reality that need to be discussed in public. Today, we are here to start talking about the current controversy surrounding devotion to Pachamama in a Catholic context. Now, before we start, I've got a whole playlist of videos from the 2019 Pachamama debate, which happened during, obviously, the papacy of the late and lamented Pope Francis. But before I start that, I just want to, because there is a lot of confusion about Pachamama and devotion to Pachamama, and some of that is reflected in the responses of the people that we're going to be seeing. I just want to quickly just provide a brief historical note. Okay, Pachamama is a word. Paca means essentially earth, cosmos, that sort of thing. And then mama is the word for mother. Mama means mother in an awful lot of human languages for pretty obvious reasons. So basically, Pachamama in Quechua and Amira and some other languages that are sort of in the like Chile, Peru, Bolivia area essentially means Mother Earth. Now, as part of the process of people in that part of the world converting to Catholicism, the understanding basically after they quit, just setting people on fire for worshiping Pachamama. After that, they sat down and actually talked to people and found out that in the indigenous religious understanding, that Pachamama is literally the earth that we walk on, and that the earth that we live on, eat the food from, all that kind of stuff, in the understanding of the indigenous people of that region, has a spirit, and that spirit can be communicated with. So the decision of Catholic theologians was essentially to say, okay, so what you're saying is that the earth, which we as Christians understand was created by God, has a spirit that can be communicated with. Now, obviously, that would, in Catholic theology, that would still mean that worshiping the earth as a goddess directly is still idolatry, because it's the worship of a created being. However, the idea that God could endow the earth with a spirit that can be communicated with isn't inherently problematic from a Catholic point of view. So Therefore, the decision was made to basically put Pachamama into the same kind of ontological category that we put, say, angels or saints in. And therefore, there's no inherent problem with people who have the correct theological understanding making offerings to Pachamama. That's the compromise that was made in the Amazon, and it seems to work really well. However, there are a lot of Catholics who have an extremely limited and extremely xenophobic understanding of Christianity who reject that. So just as I'm going to go into screen sharing now. And before I get to the Pachamama stuff, I would like to play a little bit of the Canticle of the Creatures, which was composed by Saint Francis of Assisi, who was a medieval Italian who lived long before anybody in Europe even knew that Pachamama existed, and that's what he wrote.
Be you, my Lord, through brother wind, through air and cloud, through calm and every weather, by which you sustain your creatures. Praised be you, my Lord, through sister water, so very useful and humble, precious and chaste. Praised be you, my Lord, through brother fire, by whom you light up the night, and he is handsome and merry, robust and strong. Praised be you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains us and directs us, bringing forth all kinds of fruits and colored flowers and herbs. Praised be you, my Lord, through those who forgive for your love, and who bear sickness and trial. Blessed are the...
Okay, so without over talking it, I think it's pretty easy to see how you can go from something like the Canticle of the Creatures to saying that, okay, there's room for Pachamama in Catholicism. As we will see, Pope Francis agreed with that, and other people did not. So let's just get down to business. And as always, just tell me to hit pause whenever.
Pope Francis joined Amazonian church workers and indigenous people on October 4th to plant a tree in the Vatican gardens. The event marked the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. He also consecrated the Synod for the Amazon to St. Francis. The Synod will be held at the Vatican from October 6th through October 27th. About 20 delegates from Amazonian countries opened the ceremony, singing and dancing around a mandala of Amazonian symbols. The symbols included a banner with a photograph of Sister Dorothy Stang, a missionary from Dayton, Ohio, who was murdered in Brazil in 2005 because of her defense of small farmers' land rights. Members of various church groups brought offerings of soil from symbolic places, including the Amazon, which has a rich cultural heritage, but is also a land where martyrs have died. Soil also came from India, a country vulnerable to climate change, countries where people are trafficked or forced to migrate, places where young people participate in climate change demonstrations, and the Shrine of the Renunciation in Assisi.
Okay, so what we just saw was the initial Vatican news report about what happened. So as you can see, it's pretty, like, to most people, that's pretty darn innocuous. And then the world went crazy.
The Holy Father's meeting on the Amazon has taken a criminal twist. This video emerged this morning showing two men stealing indigenous fertility statues from a church near the Vatican and tossing them into the Tiber River. EWTN contributor Colin Flynn has more from Rome. Colin?
Good evening, Wyatt. We first saw this statue during our prayer service in the Vatican Gardens at the beginning of the month to mark the opening of the Synod. The statues had been brought to the Vatican by indigenous leaders from the Amazon region, which of course is the focus of this Synod. It set off a debate over why the figure, which appears to be a pagan fertility icon, was being used in a Catholic context. There was a strong negative reaction from some Catholics around the world, and at first, defenders said it was an image of the Virgin Mary, but a Vatican spokesperson said the statue.
Now, I will mention that it appears that the two images that we saw initially in the video were actually just figures, were basically like figurines that were meant to depict just pregnant indigenous women and not necessarily the Virgin Mary. Now, I'm going to show you why that confusion happened. This is a piece of Catholic art that was painted in Europe during the Middle Ages. And here you see the Virgin Mary and when she's going to visit Saint Elizabeth. This is another icon of the visitation. I have no commercial, what are you doing? I have no commercial relationship with legacy icons, although if they want to sponsor us, I'm down. Let me see if I can actually get, okay. So you can see this particular icon, you've got, to make sure that absolutely no one missed the point, they drew the little fetuses. There's Jesus, and there's John the Baptist, complete with little halos, so that it's really obvious that this is the Virgin Mary and Elizabeth. So what seems to have happened is, because in the initial display they had, this was just another example of like how powerful iconography is, right? Like, this is a nativity scene. It's a bunch of colored blocks, but anyone with a Catholic background will look at that and their brain will just go, boom, nativity. So I think that what happened was somebody saw that the two figures had been positioned, that the two figures of pregnant women had been positioned facing each other, and they were looking at it Catholic-brained, and just looked at it and went, oh, it's the Virgin Mary and Saint Elizabeth, because it's two pregnant women facing each other. What else could it be, right? Which led to then some confusion as people were trying to figure out, is this offensive? Is this not offensive? What's actually going on here? And there was, of course, a lot of confusion at first, as there always are with news stories.
Statue represents life and was neither pagan nor sacred. Well, today, this story took a bizarre turn. This video was posted online. It shows two men entering a church.
They literally broke in
dawn.
And put it on up on YouTube.
Gathers up 5 of the statues and carries them out of the church. They proceed a short distance down the street to Castel St. Angelo, where one by one they knocked the statues off the bridge and into the Tiber River.
And we'll hear from the people who did that in a little bit, by the way.
Calling the men heroes. The Vatican called it a stunt and said that it violated the idea of dialogue. It's unknown who the two men involved are or where they're from, but the church in question, which is just next to the Vatican, has contacted the police and an investigation has begun. This latest news, although an isolated incident, is an example of
the images were recovered, and the men were initially going to be charged with theft and destruction of property, but the Catholic Church, in the spirit of turning to the other cheek, declined to press charges since everything was recovered okay.
Of the kind of tension that has surrounded the synod from the very beginning. Pope Francis called this meeting to look at ways to better serve the indigenous people of the Amazon who face poverty, exploitation, and the destruction of their homes. But for many Catholics, they see this meeting as an effort by progressives to change centuries of Catholic tradition, like priest celibacy. The synod ends this weekend when bishops will vote on a final document which will make recommendations for Pope Francis to consider. It's up to Pope Francis then whether to make those proposals a reality. In Rome, Colin Flynn for EWTN News Nightly.
Okay. Now we're going to get into the actual traditional Catholic reaction to that. It should be pointed out that what that guy was alluding to about priestly celibacy is that the Amazon is basically one of those regions where there's just kind of an expectation that a normal adult man will be married and have children. And the fact that an unmarried man is being put in a position of authority and respected as an elder is something that requires a great deal of cultural adjustment. So some people have proposed, well, maybe in the Amazon, letting priests get married or giving a greater role to married deacons or something like that would be appropriate. This causes people in the West who are very, very, very much opposed to allowing married men to be ordained as priests to basically treat the whole Amazonian process as a backdoor way of undermining priestly celibacy, which is, of course, ridiculous because there are currently Catholic rites that allow married men to be ordained. So, people could just go be Byzantine Catholic. They're creating scandal where scandal does not need to be, in my opinion. Diane Montagna it works for LifeSite News, which is based out of Canada. They are a traditional Catholic media outlet that has at times been very, very, very vocal critics of Pope Leo and Pope Francis.
I mean, they describe themselves as flat earth Catholics. I have a question though.
Yes.
What is the thought process behind priests? Like, why is that such a sticking point?
Okay. Basically, priestly celibacy is a sticking point in the West because historically there was a really, really, really big fight over priestly celibacy that didn't get settled firmly until the 12th century. And part of that had to do with the fact that, okay, if you have a man with a family who's a priest, Well, when he dies, and we're talking about like before things were clearly established, right? So it's like property gets donated to the church, right? And now all of a sudden you've got, say, a widow and a whole bunch of kids who, well, she was the widow of a priest. So now does the church have an obligation to take care of her? If so, where does that money come from? When the priest dies, should he be able to pass down his role as priest to his oldest son as a patrimony? All of these things, also, when you have a non-celibate clergy, you have the, potential for people to be influenced by their wife's family, to be influenced by concern for their children. So basically, the decision was made for a whole bunch of reasons that seemed practical at the time. And also there was just generally kind of this idea that being, well, it's like Paul said, right? It's better not to marry. And if you can't hack celibacy, then you can get married. But the idea was basically that if you're going to be a priest, if you're going to commit your life to the church, that you should commit like 100%. You should be fully committed. And there are people who will point out that, like, for example, when you're looking for people to send into potentially dangerous areas, that it's easier to send a single person who isn't going to be worried about leaving a widow and children behind if something happens to them. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't also a legitimate argument for married clergy, because obviously there are Eastern Catholics who have married clergy and it seems to work out well for them. But there are also a lot of good historical reasons for priestly celibacy. And that's one of those things that the Catholic Church is just not willing to budge on. And if it is, and if it does change, it will probably change in a way that still makes priestly celibacy the preferred option.
I just didn't know if there was like it's just oh, that's the way it's always been, kind of
yeah. Really, there's a lot of like, that's the way it's always been, but it's kind of like, that's the way it's always been because of reasons.
Oh no, I totally understand the historical reasons.
Yeah.
And the historical exceptions that have happened over time. I just didn't know if there was like a special reason.
No, there's not.
Other than just being liking a tradition that has existed since day one.
Yeah, exactly. There really isn't any like. There isn't any like definite theological like, and this is why kind of thing. It's just we've been doing this for like 1,000 years at this point. Okay, so let's get on to Diane Montagna, who well, you can read the title yourself about what she thought about it.
As you may have heard, one of the concerns coming out of the Pan-Amazonian Synod is the question of paganism. In case you haven't seen it, this was the scene last Friday in the Vatican Gardens on the feast of St. Francis that's generating considerable discussion and concern among Catholics. A group consisting of Amazonian natives, Europeans, and even a Franciscan friar bowing down before several carved wooden figures, including.
Okay, and again, you can look at that and you can see pretty quickly why somebody would go, oh, I think that's probably the like, I don't know what that is, but if I had to make a guess, I'd say it was probably the Virgin Mary and Saint Elizabeth. Like, just based on iconography. And I don't know if the person who did that set it up intentionally or not. Or if it just kind of happened. You can see there's also a couple of other little figures that are on there. But it turns out that this is really just kind of like art.
Two unclothed pregnant women. The Vatican has not yet released information on the nature of the ceremony or what the figures represent. At today's press conference, a reporter, after commenting that, quote, some American media interpreted the figure of the pregnant woman as a pagan symbol of fertility, end quote, asked panelists what they thought the carved images represented and what its connection to the synod is. One of the panelists, a Dominican, said the image, quote, was shown on other occasions, but he said he, quote, wouldn't know how to interpret it. So that's what we heard at the Vatican press conference today, that the carved wooden images and the ceremony are open to interpretation, whether pagan or Catholic. But for one indigenous leader with whom I spoke on Saturday, there is no confusion at all. Is it Christian or is it a more...
Okay. Now they are going to have an interpreter who is going to be interpreting this, the indigenous man. However, I'm pretty sure that they left a lot out. So Aldo, if you could please just maybe offer your opinion on the accuracy of the interpretation and maybe provide a basic translation of what you hear, because I have trouble with South American accents.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Primitive prayer.
É uma coisa cristã ou é uma coisa
É
primitiva?
uma
Não?
coisa primitiva, inclusive.
And of course, the audio cuts out. Okay, there we go.
Uma forma de defumar as pessoas.
Here, I'm
para o mal
gonna
não
run
tocar.
it back a little bit.
Well, the problem is the person is speaking Portuguese.
He's okay. He's speaking Portuguese. Okay.
Yeah, so I won't be able to help you. I mean,
Okay.
I can make things. I could figure them out, but it would not be 100% accurate.
Okay. Yes. So, okay. So actually, that brings up like a really good point here, right? Is that part of this is that all of this Pachamama stuff is going on in Latin America. And specifically, it's going on in Spanish-speaking countries. And a lot of the people that are griping about this are monoglot English speakers, or at least people who don't speak Spanish or don't speak Spanish very well, who are getting really excited about this. And now keep in mind that, we were talking about Pachamama is specifically a figure in like Peru, Chile, parts of Bolivia, right? So now they're talking to another man who was brought in from the Amazonian Synod, who came to the Amazonian Synod, who is from Brazil, who is speaking in Portuguese, who is basically being asked then to comment on the religious practices of a different group of indigenous people who don't speak the same language that he does, unless, of course, they've also learned how to speak Portuguese. And nobody who's presenting any of this, including, and I'll admit, like, I heard him speaking. I couldn't quite understand what I could pick out, like, I thought I could pick out a few words here and there, but I had assumed, he's just speaking Spanish with, a really strong, like, Bolivian accent or something. And, I just couldn't understand him. Aldo, who actually speaks Spanish, listens to this guy and he's like, that's Portuguese. Like, I can't help you because that's Portuguese. Now, had I known that beforehand, we might have actually been able to get somebody who spoke Portuguese who could comment on the translation. But this is kind of an illustration of how much, like, just bad information and misrepresentation is happening with all this.
Inclusive uma forma de defumar as pessoas para o mal não tocar nela, enfim, quem fazia isso eram os pajés antigamente. Hoje, com o evangelho, eu, por exemplo, me tornei um evangélico, nós não praticamos isso mais, nem meus pais não praticavam.
He is evangelical. He doesn't practice those things, but he said that the whole ceremony is a pagan ceremony. It was common among the Indians, and what they were doing there with the fire was with smoke, purifying people so that evil would not overtake them, etc. But it's 100% a pagan ceremony.
To view our entire interview with Jonas, the indigenous leader and lawyer, click below. From St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, this is Diane Montagna for LifeSite News.
Everyone knows you as the guy who threw the Pachamama.
Okay. So now we're really getting into it, because here we have on the left-hand side, this is Taylor Marshall. Taylor Marshall is a former Episcopalian who converted to Catholicism in the 2010s. And even though, now he was married at the time, and he was an ordained Episcopal priest and would have had the option to join the Anglican Ordinariate or one of the Catholic rites that allows for married priests, and to have served as a priest. For his own reasons, he chose not to do that and instead set up a quote unquote traditional Catholic YouTube channel and started publishing a whole bunch of books and became a very early and very vociferous critic of Pope Francis. The young man on the right is another convert to Catholicism, this time from Lutheranism, who had converted a year or two before he decided to throw the Pachamama idols in the Pachamama idols into the river. And it turns out that Taylor Marshall paid for his trip to Rome so that they could break into the church and steal the statues and throw them in the river.
That's crazy work.
Yeah, that's crazy work. And like Francis, we'll get to we'll have a recording, I think, where someone reads out Francis's response, but he was furious. Like, he was like, I am the Bishop of Rome, and it was like, basically, you came into my house and disrespected my guests. And no. Um, now the reason why I'm pointing out these guys are converts are not because I don't love converts, because I do love converts. But every time a Lutheran converts to Catholicism, I feel like Martin Luther cries a little bit. And, you know, I don't feel bad about that. But
I think converts, particularly adult converts,
yeah,
they're so serious about stuff. And
well,
sometimes you're like, can you take a deep breath?
yeah. Well, and also particularly a lot of the people who converted in the in the 2000 in the early 2000s, a lot of them were people who were basically, I think, attracted to the Catholic Church because it was harsh, because they perceived it as being harsh and rigid, which it certainly, to some degree was under Francis and Benedict, and they liked that. And then things changed under Francis, and they just kind of freaked the crap out and were like, no, we want our, hard, mean Catholic Church back, not realizing that that was really kind of a historical anomaly and really had a lot to do with the fact that the Catholic Church, again, has a leftward boundary and it has a rightward boundary. And after two pontificates of policing the leftward boundary really, really hard, now the Catholic Church is policing the rightward boundary. And quite frankly, is not policing the rightward boundary nearly as hard as the leftward boundary got policed. But these guys don't know that because, well, they're on their second pope. I am on my sixth pope. I have more perspective. Okay, yeah, I was born like right before the year of the three popes, so I kind of got a head start, but still. Let's go.
The idols in the river, and we thank you again for doing that. That was a great moment of victory and joy in
well, now Taylor, isn't now the time to tell the people a little bit about how we were in contact?
I guess perhaps we can. I wasn't prepared for that, but yeah, Alexander and I had met in Rome before all this. We met before even the Pachas were out, and when we learned about the tree that was planted in that ceremony with the Pachas, we were at dinner and we were discussing how we might go in and rip that tree out of the ground. And Alexander knows some people who live in the Vatican area, and he's been back in there. And so we were just talking about the terrain and where people are. And I think someone brought up the fact that there might be snipers on top of Santa Marta. Right? That kind of scared us a little bit. So at this point, we didn't really.
Okay. What he's talking about actually is true, because the Swiss Guard, although, we mostly see them in, when you notice the Swiss Guard, it's when they're in their like, really fancy orange and blue outfit, and they look like they came out of a Renaissance painting, and it's, oh, how quaint. Yeah, no, they are a like modern elite military service who have one job, and that one job is to defend the Pope. And if somebody had been trying to break into Castle Santa Marta, to break into, not Castle, sorry, to break into Santa Marta, which is the hostel that visiting prelates stay in at the Vatican, which is also where Pope Francis chose to live. If somebody had tried to do that, undoubtedly a bunch of men with, with modern weaponry and absolutely no sense of humor would have found them and stopped them. So yeah, so these guys, again, they were willing to be obnoxious, but they were in the end not willing to be obnoxious unless they thought they could get away with it.
No martyrdom here.
Yeah, they're going for like soft martyrdom, right?
They want to be canceled, but not.
Yeah, they want to be canceled, but
not crucified.
Yeah, exactly. They want to be canceled, but they want to be canceled in the way that, lets you build your brand.
Well, that is what canceling is for, I'm pretty sure.
Exactly. Well, and like, let's be clear, like, actually, like, the whole Pachamama thing was really what gave Taylor Marshall his, like, that was what put Taylor Marshall on the map. Like, the reason why Taylor Marshall is still a hero to tradcaths is because he is the man who paid the man who threw the idols in the Tiber.
Know about the Pachas, and actually I think the Pachas had been revealed,
I have to step away.
They were still saying that they were Mary and Elizabeth, which none of us really bought, but at least it wasn't outright idolatry.
Yeah, the fight was going on, and it was Friday evening, and the video, the short version of the video of the Vatican Garden rituals.
Yes.
Now we talked about the tree because the statues were still they all fought about it. Yes. Nobody knew what they are.
Yes. So that was the weekend. I flew out very early Monday morning. I think you and I spent the day together on Sunday.
Yes.
And then I flew out early Monday morning. And as I was getting on the plane, my wife sent me a text saying, "Look at this." And it was the poster board of the woman nursing the piglet. I opened it and I was like, oh, because there's like a breast on there, and I closed it out and I was like, why did my wife send me that? I didn't even process what it was. And then when I landed in America, whatever.
Okay, what he was talking about and was like disgusted by is the way that women in Papua New Guinea, when they are like basically having like problems breastfeeding, like establishing breastfeeding, like especially if they get like mastitis or like any other problems, will use a piglet to like empty the breast or to like establish nursing to establish a good milk supply. It's the kind of thing that, in America, women are encouraged to do the same thing using a breast pump. Guess what? In Papua New Guinea, they don't have breast pumps. So they've figured out a way to deal with a medical situation using the technology available to them.
I was laughing because he goes, "Ooh, breast."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Sir, take it
easy.
Yeah, exactly. And like Taylor Marshall is the father of 8 children. Presumably he has seen a woman nursing a baby, right? Also, I would like to point out there's a heck of a lot of art that shows the Virgin Mary nursing the baby Jesus. And sometimes baby Jesus is attached, and sometimes you just see the Virgin Mary like with one breast exposed as she's preparing or has just finished feeding the baby Jesus. And it's not weird. And that's actually the thing that bugs me, I think, the most about all these attacks on Pachamama, is because these guys sound exactly like Protestants sound when they're accusing Catholics of worshiping the Virgin Mary. Like you could take, like you could find the Protestant equivalent of this talking about saints very, very
1,000%.
easily.
1,000%.
Yeah. And it's also,
and I can tell you where to find those arguments, by the way.
yeah. And it's also worth pointing out that, for example, in the collection of objects that were part of the ritual that they keep yelling about, there was a picture of a Catholic, of a living human Catholic woman who had been martyred. Dogs, hush. Who had been martyred because of work she was doing to advocate for indigenous people in the Amazon, right? And they aren't saying boo about, oh, well, they were bad. If there had just been the picture of that woman there and everybody had been doing exactly the same stuff, these guys would not have been saying boo, because in their understanding of Catholicism, like all kinds of really, like, serious devotional practice involving a picture of a Catholic saint or a Catholic martyr is completely legitimate. So it's like they're making a really bad argument, and they're making a really bad argument basically because they don't want accommodations to be made to the belief system of indigenous people in the Amazon that were absolutely made to the belief system of indigenous people in the British Isles, in Europe, in North Africa, in the Middle East.
It happened so long ago that that has been erased from memory.
Yeah, except that also the other thing that they love is scholastic philosophy, which is 110 which is 110% the result of medieval Europeans reading Aristotle. It's oh, we can pull stuff in from Greeks who existed thousands of years before Christianity, and that's not a problem. It's the hypocrisy that annoys me. But anyway, let's see what these guys have to say.
13 hours later, I was talking to Joy, and she said, "Did you see what I sent you?" I said, "Yeah, what was that?" She goes, "That's inside of a church. It's a woman nursing an animal. All things are connected. This is where those idols are also placed." And I was still in the airplane. We haven't even deboarded yet. And I was thinking myself, oh my goodness, Rome is in total spiritual ruin right now. So you and I kept talking, and I was going to fly over, and we were making these plans to get rid of the idols. I lost Alexander. Let me get him back on. There we are. Good.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, we were talking about it. I was going to fly over, but you had a limited window, and the synod was going to come to an end. My difficulty is Bishop Athanasius Schneider was coming to my parish the next weekend, and I needed to be there to see Bishop Schneider. So at that point, we were just needing to get it done. And so you worked out your plan with your friend, and
yes.
I wired you some money for airfare, and you guys flew from Vienna over to Rome.
Okay, okay. I just want to point out that these guys are literally admitting to a criminal conspiracy live on YouTube. because that's literally where we are right now. They are admitting to a criminal conspiracy, which also, by the way, involves showing profound disrespect to the Pope. And these are the same people who want to claim that they are the guardians of tradition.
Yeah, international criminal conspiracy is quite a tack to take.
Yeah, exactly. And again, and again, Taylor, and again, I would like to point out, Taylor Marshall could have become a Catholic priest if he wanted to. He chose not to do that. And we can speculate as to why, but I would imagine that he's probably, making a better living as a YouTuber than he would as a parish priest in a Byzantine Catholic parish in the middle of Nebraska.
I would require to give him something.
And you got it done.
That's it, yes.
It was a wonderful thing. And then you sent me the video footage.
Yes.
And I edited the video footage. And then this has never been told before. And then as I just waited until you texted me and said, our airplane is off the ground in Rome. We're free, we're out of Rome. And then at that point I uploaded the footage to YouTube. So that's the real story.
So they didn't upload the footage until they were out of the immediate reach of the Italian police. So yeah, now all of the videos that we've seen so far, now all of the videos that we've seen so far were filmed about 6 years ago. So basically, right as the Pachamama thing was going on, or maybe a few months later, this video that we're going to watch now was made about 3 years ago. And the reason why I'm doing this is just to demonstrate kind of in the what Pachamama has become, what the Pachamama incident or the Pachamama debacle, as some people like to call it, has kind of become in sort of like tradcath understanding, right? Because in the minds of traditional Catholics, the Pachamama thing is like right up there with like Luther nailing the 95 Theses to the door as like a major incident in the Catholic Church. I would wager that for probably like 90% of the world's Catholics, this is not something that we particularly worry about. Like people might be aware, oh yeah, there's like people in the Amazon that occasionally do rituals where they make offerings to like Mother Earth, and like, that's their thing, and it's kind of like whatever, okay. In the same way that we're aware that like on the feast of St. Peter and St. Paul in Italy, they have boat races. Or like in Italy, like there's a witch named La Befana that gives the little kids their presents, right? It's something that people are aware of, but it's not something that really like impacts your life, right? It's just kind of like, okay, in other parts of the world, people do Catholicism a little bit differently, right? And I know that if I go to Peru and I go to Mass, it's going to look a little bit different than what I have at my home parish. But it's also the case that when I went to Mass in Denver, it wasn't exactly the same as my home parish either. things are different. Catholic means universal, people. And now we have Anthony Stein, friend of the channel, Tradcath. He's another early teens convert. He converted in 2014, which again, I point out, he basically, he was like, I'm going to become Catholic to own the libs. And then, Francis happened, and he hasn't been happy ever since. And I genuinely feel sorry for him, because I think that he wants to be a decent person. It's just that he doesn't quite know how to do that, which is a common problem with a lot of, men of, like Gen X men. It was a problem. So let's see what Anthony has to say.
Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations. In October 2019, on the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, Francis participated in an event that involved the desecration of the Vatican gardens, the desecration of St. Peter's Basilica, and the enthronement of a demon in the form of an ancient idol adored by professed adversaries.
So now we've gone from maybe this was like kind of questionable, wait, was this maybe idolatry? To now we are fully at Pachamama is a demon, and they were worshiping a demon.
Desecration. And he just called the Pope Francis, like,
yeah. Yeah. And yeah, well he's actually at this point he was still mostly calling the Pope Francis. A really good way to find out like how radically traditional somebody is if they dead name the Pope. Because in like Catholicism, it's generally understood that once the Pope becomes Pope, like using their birth name is just incredibly disrespectful. Which is why, I think that most Catholics, whether they admit it or not, understand why trans people don't like to be referred to by their dead name. Because it's like, yeah, we know exactly how that works. So yeah, pretty much if anybody would refer to the Pope as Prevost or Bergoglio, it's a clear sign, it's like a clear sign of intentional disrespect.
Of our Blessed Lord. The Pachamama event is well known, and I've done numerous exposés on the various times Pachamama has resurfaced since that initial event.
I've been watching him for a while now, and I would say that he brings up Pachamama at least once a month, like just kind of in general, and frequently more than that. Like, yeah. Pachamama lives rent free in his head. If I actually believed that Pachamama was a demon, I would wonder if he was like demonically obsessed.
Could be.
Or just, regular obsessed.
However, one detail escaped my notice until 2 months ago, when another Catholic YouTuber and I were talking privately about the alleged Fatima consecration Francis was doing on the Feast of the Annunciation, when a new and interesting set of details was brought to my attention, and it really cast the Pachamama debacle.
Okay, I should just mention quickly the whole Fatima consecration thing. Okay, in Catholicism, you can you can consecrate anything to anything, right? Which it's basically I'm putting like I could say I could like consecrate my dog to Saint Francis, right? I'm asking Saint Francis to protect my dog, or like people will like say like I will do a prayer like I consecrate myself to the Sacred Heart, right? It's like that's what they're dedicating it to. They're putting themselves or the thing that's being consecrated under the protection of that thing. In when the in the early 20th century, when the Fatima apparition happened, one of the things that the Virgin Mary was reported to have said to the shepherd children was she wanted Russia to be consecrated to the protection of the Blessed Virgin. And that didn't happen for a really long time for a whole bunch of reasons. But eventually, Francis consecrated Russia to the Virgin Mary. And somehow that wasn't a good thing, probably because they don't like Francis.
In a whole new sinister light. So I want to thank that YouTuber for assisting me. There's a link to his channel in the comments section, in the pinned comment here on YouTube. So go check his channel out. I think you'll like it. And today we're going to go over all of the Pachamama events in brief, and I'll demonstrate how they are all an attack on the sanctity of the Blessed Virgin Mary herself. So let's get into the story. And let's begin before the Pachamama event itself. In 2018, Francis took a famous South American trip that I was at the time not bothering to cover. My channel was started in 2018 and I was very new at it. I hadn't learned yet that pretty much everything he does is used to cause division and scandal in the church. On that trip, he just
yes, and who is using everything that Francis does to create division and scandal in the church? Where is that division and scandal coming from? Could it be coming from tradcasts who are really big mad that, you know, Benedict wasn't replaced, because like keep in mind, in their perfect world, Pope Benedict would have stayed Pope until he died and would have been replaced by like Schneider or Erdo or Mueller or Sarah or one of the other like extremely, extremely traditional cardinals, right? Or bishops. Well, that didn't happen. And instead we got Francis. And they immediately started working to oppose Francis. And now they're working to oppose Leo. And part of the reason why they're doing that we'll see in part 2 is by trying to link Leo to Pachamama.
Displayed his first act of wickedness involving ancient demonic idols. In January 2018, Francis visited Chile. He met with secular leaders, said several masses, and well, at one mass he wore a chasuble that featured this idol. For those listening on Spotify or Podbean, it's the same symbol as the Nazca line walkers used in ancient time.
Okay, again, that's not an idol. It's a design. It's art. Nobody is quite sure what the figures in the Nazca lines represent. But there's something that, you know, people in Chile are justly proud of because, you know, they're like creating them was really, really hard. And they're still there and they're really old and they're really cool. I mean, it's people being proud of their culture, which everybody should be proud of their culture, right? I mean, I'm not even from Chile, and I'm just proud of the fact that, like, if aliens came to Earth and I wanted to show them, like, look at the cool stuff that humans have done, right? Look at what our species can do, that would be on my list because it's an objectively cool thing. So the fact that the Pope has a cool picture on his robes is not, particularly bad, particularly when, like, let's talk about the design of Catholic vestments are basically, fancy late Roman, early medieval clothing. And we just kept them because they're cool, right?
Mm-hmm. Times in South America, the symbol is called the Atacama Giant. The image was unveiled on the Feast of the Holy Family according to the pre-conciliar liturgical calendar, that is the 1962 liturgical calendar, and it happened here on January 8th of that year. That feast celebrates Our Lady, Saint Joseph, and our Blessed Lord. Bear that in mind as we move forward, because there will be a noticeable pattern here. Now, Francis wore that getup at the various masses he offered in Chile on his trip and said some fairly blasé, Francis, almost Catholic sounding things during that while wearing that icon on his chest. And for those not aware, the Atacama Giant is a representation of an ancient demon, cut from the same cloth or perhaps the same entity as the Pachamama, just a different culture, a different representation, the same modes of worship.
Yeah. Everything we don't like is a demon. And the fact that when Francis was giving his homilies on that trip, he didn't actually say anything that they could object to.
He sounded sort of Catholic.
Yeah. Which basically means that he said perfectly normal Catholic things, and they can't accept that anybody who doesn't exactly agree with them can possibly be Catholic, even if that person is the Pope. This is where I point out that the phrase so-and-so it thinks that so-and-so is more Catholic than the Pope, or thinks they're more Catholic than the Pope, is not a proverb that exists to be a compliment. And the statement, is the Pope Catholic? is not meant, it's a rhetorical question because the answer is inevitably yes.
Same entity. There are no coincidences in any of these things, folks. The Pachamama event itself came about 18 months later in the next year, a mere month before the initial whispers of the woe and affliction that dominated everything from 2020 onwards began. For the brief account of that story.
Oh yeah, I should also mention that because this happened in 2019, there was an initial attempt to blame the COVID pandemic on the Pachamama ritual and the tree planting. Now, that specific part of let's blame COVID for, let's claim COVID as the wrath of God, has largely died out, mostly because these guys don't want to admit that COVID was actually a thing, or that the COVID lockdowns or that the vaccines were necessary. So they kind of dropped the COVID is the wrath of God interpretation. But here, 3 years ago, it was still kind of floating around.
To refresh your memory, here's an excerpt from a new, unfortunately deleted article on the website Contra Recentia Secula Ligia, where the unknown author posted the following description of the whole mess. And unfortunately, it's been deleted, but I saw it quoted somewhere, and you can, in my sources, you'll be able to find the quoting citation of it. Anyway, quote, on October 4th, Pope Francis attended an act of idolatrous worship of the pagan goddess Pachamama. He allowed this worship to take place in the Vatican Gardens, thus desecrating the vicinity of the graves of the martyrs and of the Church of the Apostle Peter.
Now, I would like to point out, that so here you can see we've gone straight from there was this statue that may have been the Virgin Mary, may have been Elizabeth, may have just been a piece of art that somebody stuck in there because they thought it was cool and significant, to all of a sudden, it's like, yep, it was definitely a representation of Pachamama, which does not seem to be supported by anything at all. And oh, by the way, Pachamama is definitely a demon. For real, y'all.
Participated in this act of idolatrous worship.
I would also like to point out that, okay, there's all kinds of accounts of from early Christian hagiography of, when saints come in the presence of idols, there will be earthquakes. The idols are destroyed. Things explode. The hagiographies of St. Patrick, they involve him engaging in full-on wizard battles, right? So according to normal Catholic theology, the fact that all of these ceremonies happened with these wooden statues around, in the Vatican Gardens, in these churches with the relics of St. Peter and the martyrs and all this kind of stuff, and there were no fires, there were no lightning strikes, there was nothing happened, is generally kind of an indication that probably it was okay. Because if it had been an idol, somebody would have taken care of that. So that's, and also, again, the Pope is right there, right? So if the Pope is right there and the Pope is saying, yeah, looks legit to me, your average Catholic just kind of goes, okay, looks legit to me, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because again, there are all kinds of stories about spontaneously combusting icons. And generally so basically what they're arguing is not just that Pachamama is a demon, but that Pachamama is a demon so powerful that she can outweigh the power of St. Peter and a whole bunch of martyrs. And I'm sorry, that does not strike me as a good Catholic argument. It's we should be putting our faith in the power of God to defeat demons. We shouldn't be assuming that demons can defeat God.
started by blessing a wooden image of Pachamama. On October 7th, the idol of Pachamama was placed in front of the main altar at St. Peter's and then carried in procession to the Synod Hall. Pope Francis said prayers in a ceremony involving this image and then joined in this procession. When wooden images of this deity were removed from the Church of Santa Maria in Transpontina, where they had been sacrilegiously placed, and thrown into the Tiber by Catholics outraged by this profanation of the church, Pope Francis, on October 25th, apologized for the removal, and another wooden image of Pachamama was returned to the church. Thus, a new profanation was initiated. On October 27th, in the closing mass for the synod, he accepted a bowl used in the idolatrous worship of Pachamama and placed it on the altar. End quote. The initial act was on the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, a saint who had been rebranded by some of the worst public figures in the world as the patrons of all things green, which makes little sense given that his message was penance and restoration of a pious Catholic faith in a time of ecclesial corruption. Now let's go back, though, to October 7th. The idol of Pachamama was placed in front of the main altar in St. Peter's on that day.
Okay, now I want to bring up the fact that like they keep bringing about, oh, this was the feast day of this was the feast day of that, right? And sometimes it's this was the feast day of this or that in the old calendar. Okay, pretty much every single day of the year is the feast day of like at least one saint. And part of the reason why the calendar got reformed in Vatican II was because there were just so many feast days that people were required to go to church on, that people were just not able to do it and like work a normal 9-to-5 job. So the fact that you can find a Marian feast day that happened to coincide with any of this stuff. No, okay, yeah, the tree planting happened on the Feast of St. Francis for like real symbolic reasons, but sometimes it's just a thing, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm just sorry. The construction of Saint Francis of Assisi is just like some guy who cared about church order is wild to me because I'm not even Catholic, and I know that's that Saint Francis's theology involved a lot of concern for the earth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we just listened to, at the beginning of this episode, we listened to the Canticle of the Creatures, right? Where he specifically is talking about our sister, Mother Earth, right? It's the idea that you can go, well, and also, again, Francis was preaching reform in an era of corruption, right? Well, you know, one could make the argument that the behavior of billionaires and major corporations that is damaging the earth is in fact corrupt. And that, you know, if more people would, you know, commit to, say, you know, not extracting every drop of oil that can be extracted and burning it, maybe things might be a little bit better. I don't know, that might be a little bit radical, but you know, like to me it's just the idea that like penance and reform has to be individualized is a really, really Protestant idea.
Yeah, it reads from converts who probably converted from some version of Protestant, and they were like, this isn't strict enough. There's not enough rules, which is wild, frankly, considering.
Anthony Stein claims to have been an agnostic when he converted. I don't know what tradition, if any, he was raised in.
Oh, because it feels very very fundamentalist.
Yeah.
Because that's a thing I've noticed even with like people who deconstruct from fundamentalist like Protestant things. They tend to drop God, but not the fundamentalist part. And you're like,
Yeah.
The part that was hurting people was that part. But okay.
Yeah. Okay, so here we go.
Day, which is the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary according to the traditional liturgical calendar, the 1962 liturgical calendar. That's a second feast day corrupted by Francis. The idols had been removed by Alexander Schugel from a parish dedicated to Our Lady as well. The day Francis accepted the bowl of soil which had been used for that wicked rite was October 27th, the feast of the dedication of the Basilica of Our Lady, Help of Christians. A minor Marian feast day, unless you're in Turin, Italy, or in a community elsewhere in the world tied to Turin, Italy. And Turin is not that far from the Vatican, all things considered. The next act by Francis was the issuing of a Pachamama commemorative coin, which I reported on in 2020 when it came out. From the CNA article reporting this, quote, the 10 euro silver coin marks the 50th anniversary of World Earth Day. The front of the coin is the image of a pregnant woman embracing her round belly, which looks like a globe. Stalks of wheat are in her hair. Luigi Oldiani, an Italian sculptor and Catholic who designed the coin, told CNA that he wanted to imagine the earth as a young pregnant woman who protects the earth, a young mother. The image on the coin has been compared to carved wooden figures of a pregnant woman that were on display in churches and at events during the Vatican's 2019.
Okay, so this is a coin that was designed by an Italian Catholic that for Earth Day that just happened to show a pregnant woman, but like was like the earth represented as a pregnant woman, right? Which is a pretty common artistic image. And they're going, boom, okay, it's Pachamama. Everything is Pachamama. Everything I don't like is woke, Marxist, or Pachamama.
Synod of Bishops on the Amazon. Those figures referred to by Pope Francis and others as Pachamama were said by some to depict an Andean fertility goddess, while Vatican spokesmen characterized them more vaguely as symbols of quote-unquote life. Two such Pachamama figures were eventually taken from a church near the Vatican and thrown into the Tiber River and were later recovered. Oldiani, the artist, said he was commissioned by the Mint to design a coin expressing the theme of Earth Day, and the idea of the woman bearing the earth was his own approach to that theme. The image of the young woman is just something that came to me, Oldiani told CNA, end quote. Yeah, it just came to him. Maybe it was honest inspiration, these things do happen, or maybe it was something preternatural. Either way, this coin is clearly Pachamama.
To quote Saturday Night Live of my youth, could it be, oh, say, Satan? I mean, like, or in this case, could it be, oh, say, Pachamama? Because that's literally, because let's be clear, that is what he is suggesting, right? It is that, like, this guy was either like demonically possessed or something.
Regardless of the hemming and hawing about it that the Vatican engaged in after the fact. Here are some basic facts about the Pachamama coin. It was announced by the Vatican on October 13th, the anniversary of the miracle of the sun at Fatima, but the story gets weirder from here. On the day of the miracle of the sun, when the event was happening in 1917, St. Maximilian Kolbe was in Rome, watching a procession of stonecutters promising to take the church over and to end the faith. He was watching the procession.
Okay. Stonecutter is the word that Anthony Stein uses to describe Freemasons. Because
I was wondering.
Yeah. That's the word he uses to describe Freemasons, because he's discovered that if he says Freemasons explicitly, that people will sometimes report him for hate speech. And he gets episodes demonetized. But if he says stonecutter, that gives him plausible deniability. But he actually means Freemasons. Now, it is actually true that that St. Maximilian Kolbe because like in the early 1900s in Italy, there was a very strong like basically all the radical leftists went like hard against the Catholic Church, right? There was like a strong anti-clericalism that was going on. And the precise reasons aren't like really relevant here. And the Freemasons, basically just to troll the Catholic Church, had a big procession, and they had this big banner that showed like Satan tramping on Saint Michael. And like they were doing it to be provocative. And Maximilian Kolbe, who was there at the time, formed an organization that was basically aimed at opposing like radical atheists who were opposed to the Catholic Church. But it wasn't like some kind of evil, dark, satanic plot. It was trolls being trolls, right? And the fact that this happened the same day as the miracle of the sun in Fatima is something that you can or cannot ascribe great cosmic significance to. The miracle of the sun in Fatima was basically a solar phenomena that's called a sundog that happened for several hours in Fatima in Portugal. It was observed by a lot of independent witnesses. It's something that really happened. Again, it was a natural phenomena. However, the kids had announced that there was going to be some kind of miraculous event that took place at this time on this day prior to the event, which is also documented. And then there was a weird solar phenomena. So for people who want to believe that Fatima was a real apparition, it's kind of like prediction made, prediction confirmed, something happened, boom, miracle.
At that time that the miracle of the sun was occurring in Portugal. October 16th, 3 days later, the day the day the coin was formally issued by the Vatican is the anniversary of St. Maximilian Kolbe founding the Militia Immaculata, which was his prayerful organization whose peaceful purpose was to combat the errors of the stonecutters in defense of the church.
Freemasons.
The Marian connection to the Pachamama event
is more
than a pattern at this point. And if you're not convinced that this is a big deal, that Pachamama is just a representation of Our Lady done in some context that you and I aren't quite familiar with, I present to you this excerpt from the blog of Joshua T. Charles, who did the legwork on finding out what the scholarly work says about Pachamama. He begins by talking about his confrontation with an unnamed bishop on Twitter and how that bishop defended the Pacha-demon's inclusion in the Vatican at that time. Quote, "So why do I write this blog post today? Because of a recent, again disturbing encounter with a Catholic bishop over Twitter. I won't mention his name, but in our interaction, he claimed that Pachamama was just a, quote, cultural symbol. Addressing him with the respect due to him as Your Excellency, I protested that a statement simply wasn't true. I suggested he check out standard.
Wow. So he actually addressed him as Your Excellency before he accused him of being an idolater. So, that makes it okay.
Encyclopedic reference sources to see that this was so. I included a link to the Encyclopedia Britannica entry on Pachamama, which simply says Indian deity. When I informed the bishop about this, he merely said, Happy Holy Week. That's it. In the same encyclopedia's entry.
Okay, I just want to take a second to appreciate this interaction. So a guy was flipping out on Twitter. A bishop from the relevant part of the world told him, calm down, it's just a cultural symbol. His response was to say, well, actually, and include a link to the Encyclopedia Britannica, which called it an Andean deity. The Encyclopedia Britannica is, by the way, produced by people in Britain who maybe aren't quite as familiar with the situation as our nameless Catholic prelate, and who certainly aren't as well versed in Catholicism. And the bishop, using more kindness and restraint than I would have personally been capable of, really, in that situation, just said, Happy Holy Week, which is basically the Catholic equivalent of saying, bless your heart, which is the Southern American equivalent of saying, go F yourself, but nicely and Catholic. Okay.
Nature worship, Pachamama is described as the Andean Earth Mother figure worshipped by the Peruvians. In the entry on Bolivia, we find this line, quote, some characteristics of pantheistic pre-Columbian religion have survived in the Indian communities of the Altiplano, especially in the worship of Pachamama, the goddess of the earth, emphasis added. In an entry on Inca religion, we read that the earth was called Pachamama, or Earth Mother. Encyclopedia.com contains these words in its entry on Pachamama. Pachamama, the Earth Mother goddess of the Incas. Pachamama was an agricultural deity worshipped with regard to fertility and the protection of crops. In short, it is quite clear that Pachamama is no mere cultural symbol. She is an earth goddess, an idol. The quote, Mother Earth worshipped by pre-Christian groups. As a psalmist reminds us, quote, for all the gods of the peoples are idols, end quote. And that's not the end of it. Mr. Charles had at one time been a Protestant missionary.
But see, it should have been the end of it, because he's literally putting his opinion and the information from encyclopedia.com over, a bishop. So yeah, and again, this guy used to be a Protestant missionary.
And well connected to other Protestant missionaries before he became a Catholic. He reached out to some old friends, explained what was happening, and they provided him with this information. There's more than merely honoring ancient practices going on here. There's something being done by design. Remember what I told you about St. Maximilian Kolbe here a moment ago. Quote, throughout this debacle, I kept having a vague memory about having heard about this Pachamama before. Then I remembered that when I was in my early 20s, still a Protestant, I had a dear friend who had been on multiple missionary trips to South America. On most of those trips, he frequently encountered syncretistic Catholic ancient sites and practices, some even having to do with Pachamama.
Okay, let's be absolutely clear here. Protestant missionaries operating in South America have a tendency to say that devotion to the Virgin Mary is idol worship.
Oh yes, 1,000%. Like this is as somebody who grew up in a rather iconoclastic tradition, this anxiety about Pachamama from people with like statues and windows and things that all reflect saints and whatnot. It feels weird.
Exactly. Like the Protestant missionaries that they're using as sources on this are literally people who don't think that Catholics are Christian.
Probably, yeah. It's a really solid chance.
Yeah.
Or a bad Christian.
Relayed to me were disturbing. I recently asked this Protestant friend to write a testimony about some of his encounters with Pachamama on his missionary trips, given recent events, and particularly the claims by some Catholic bishops that Pachamama is a mere, quote, cultural symbol. Not only does his account refute the notion, but it testifies to a very disturbing acquiescence in this ancient group by at least some of the Catholic Church in South America. Additionally, this friend spoke of multiple stonecutter symbols placed around these altars.
Freemasons. He means Freemasons.
Areas, as well as on top of Catholic churches. Locals, he said, would tell them and point out the many places where there's a good deal of ancient religion down here that is mixed with Catholicism and stonecutter symbolism, end quote. In the past, I also presented a video on how the Paca demon was used as a sort of mascot or symbolic representation for a project by the United Nations for what appear on the surface to be pretty innocuous purposes having to do with development and all green things. But cast in the light of that man's testimony, combined with Francis's odd focus on that part of the world and his insistence on developing a new rite of mass for that region of the world that does include ancient practices, you get a picture painted that is anything but innocuous. There is a pattern here of smearing the Blessed Virgin and those who observe her with this idol. There is a pattern of stonecutters being involved, whether in South America or in their institutions that Francis allies with. And this is why so many...
That's the other thing that trad Caths like to go on about, like, a lot, is about how there was this giant Masonic conspiracy to infiltrate and undermine Catholicism. So it's basically everything that they don't like is either woke Pachamama or Freemasons.
When you don't understand how things work, things look like a conspiracy.
Yes, everything is a conspiracy.
Catholics did not trust his consecration, given that it happened on a major Marian feast day. Now I have to ask, did I miss any major involvement or action involving the Paca demon? Did I miss any events or dates? Things that happened? Did I leave any of them out? If I did, let me know in the comments, please. And along with your thoughts on this whole debacle, I'm definitely interested in what you have to say on this. Have we seen the last of Pachamama? Is Francis likely to allow something like it to happen yet again? Were those Marian dates that I listed there merely a coincidence?
Yeah.
Let me know in the comments, please, and like and subscribe if you haven't. It
No,
really does
I'm good. Thank you.
Always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stein. Ave Maria.
It was recently discovered that Father Robert Prevost.
Okay, and then I'm just gonna. This is, let's see, when was this made? This is more recent. I'm just going to play the first couple minutes of it to kind of serve as an introduction to what we're going to be doing next week, when we will be getting really deep into the Pope Leo of it all.
The future Pope Leo XIV likely participated in a Pachamama ritual in 1995 when he was a South American missionary priest. What do Catholics do with this information? Hello, Merrick Sams, and welcome to Crisis Point. Okay, so we finally get to talk about something other than politics this week, so that's good. Unfortunately, it's not something very uplifting, I don't think. So last week, LifeSite News published an article in which they basically said that Pope Leo XIV, back in 1995, when his father Robert Prevost, a missionary priest in South America, participated in a Pachamama ritual. Now, that's a pretty bold claim. That's a pretty outlandish claim, scandalous claim. You better be able to back it up. Well, they kind of did. So here's the picture they posted. I need to get that bigger. Here, let me put it up on the screen a little bit bigger here. Okay. So what you see in this picture is it's like looks like a prayer service. And if you look in the back third to the left, that's pretty obviously Father Robert Prevost. Now, there's a caption. This is from a book I think it's on an ecology conference or something from back then. And this is from a book published back then. And there's a caption in Spanish. The book is Spanish. Now, I had the caption, I don't speak Spanish. I had the caption translated by Google Gemini, an AI program. And basically what it says is celebrate.
Okay. Again, like, this is not particularly difficult Spanish. It just says that it's the Pachamama, in parentheses, Mother Earth, which is a agricultural and cultural right in the South Amazon in Peru and Bolivia. The fact that the people who are opining on this have like so little knowledge of what they're doing, and like didn't even bother to like, you know, ask somebody they knew who can read Spanish, what does this say? And instead it's like, oh, Google Gemini, sure. I'm gonna rely on Google Translate. Now, admittedly, this is an area where like Google Translate will give you a good rough translation, just because, again, the Spanish is so simple.
Of the right of the Pachamama, parentheses, Mother Earth, which is an agricultural right offered by the cultures of the South Andean region in Peru and Bolivia. So a celebration of the right of Pachamama. So to say that this is a Pachamama ritual isn't exactly stretching the truth any, or going beyond what's obviously, I mean, literally the caption in the book says it's a right of the Pachamama, Mother Earth. And Father Robert Prevost seems to be clearly in that photo and celebrate. He's kneeling in that photo. There's another photo that came out soon after that, in which it looks like they're bowing down, and he's starting to bow down. It looks like. I mean, I will say it's hard to kind of explain it in a way that didn't really happen. And so
okay, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop this right now. So anyway, that's basically where we are right now. So you kind of understand the mythology that has been built up around the original tree planting ceremony, and which is like literally what it was. The Pope planted a tree. There was some indigenous artwork present while the tree was being planted that was later used as a decoration in some of the churches. And that has turned into in the minds of these Catholics, has turned into like one of the biggest scandals of Francis's entire pontificate. And now they're trying to transfer that energy to Pope Leo. Next week, we'll be getting into the Leo of it all a little bit more. And I have the actual clip from John Henry Weston and LifeSite News when they broke the amazing story, which again involved somebody. Oh, okay. I just want to take a second to appreciate this, okay? Somebody found a book that was published about the proceedings of an Augustinian ecological conference that happened in 1995. And as soon as they saw, oh, Pope Leo was in there as a much younger man, proceeded to just completely freak out about it, which tells me that there are probably people who are like scouring the earth for every for any scandal that they can possibly dredge up and try to create. So that's kind of where we are today. To the best of my knowledge, other than Pope Francis issuing an apology for what Taylor Marshall and his little friend decided to do, the Vatican has not issued an official response to any of that, probably because they don't want to dignify these people with a response or make it into like a big international scandal by giving these guys a little bit of oxygen. However, as I'm fond of pointing out, we are a, under 50 subscriber YouTube channel. So we can address this issue without giving them any dignity. In fact, probably being yelled at by a tiny little YouTube channel with non-existent production value is probably about what they deserve. So there we are with Pachamama Part 1. I hope that it was at least entertaining. And if nothing else, I think it was kind of a good example of how historical memory is kind of created in real time. Because, we kind of saw from, over the course of like 3 years, where the presentation went again from something weird happened, should we be mad, to the Pope is like worshiping demons on the regular. And that's a really wild claim. And that's a really, really wild claim to be making if you are a Catholic. So yeah, that's where we are. I don't know if anybody else had any closing thoughts about this.
Well, there are many things at stake in here. I'm not sure if you would like me to go into detail
Please.
Right now or on the next video.
Yeah. If there's anything like specifically about the Francis of it all that you want to go into, or just kind of about like the way that go ahead. Like we can at least sort of set things up for next week.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is what I would say. So there are many factors at stake, and I guess I can understand the logic that is behind their arguments. But at the same time, it seems to me that they are ignoring a long history behind the way Catholicism has been reinterpreted or adapted in different cultures, in different times, in different places. So I'm not justifying them, but I can see where the argument comes from. But it has many problems because of the historical trajectory of this kind of ideas. That is what I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I have to say that, as an American Catholic whose, tradition doesn't, involve anything like making offerings to the earth, that's not something that, I particularly am interested in getting involved in terms of my own religious practice.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, like, I'm also not particularly attracted to the brown scapular, which, and again, I know people who have a very strong devotion to Our Lady of Mount Carmel and to the brown scapular. It's not my thing. Pachamama, not my thing. But I don't feel like we can sit here and say that's not Catholic when the same arguments, especially when the same arguments that are used to criticize Pachamama are used to criticize devotion to the Virgin Mary by other people.
And you touched a very interesting point in the sense that despite we belonging to a Catholic, congregation or a Christian congregation or any kind of religious congregation, I think it is inevitable that we all will have our own opinions regarding religion, despite us being under some kind of umbrella kind of definition of Catholicism or any religion in that sense. And that is inevitable, and that cannot be managed or controlled in any way, because in the end we can just decide not to share our personal views on some aspects of our religion, which would be criticized by others, and that would be the end of it. But these people try to weaponize it to impose their own vision of their religion, to manage or to wield authority in some sense.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a vision of Catholicism that I would argue is really just kind of ahistorical. Because there's always been a willingness to adapt local practices. It's just that these people are drawing the line in a different place than, frankly, the current hierarchy of the Catholic Church is drawing that line.
100%, yes.
And, at the end of the day, it's like, dude, I'm sorry that, I really just want to look at these guys and go, dude, I'm sorry that you're not the Pope. I know it hurts you on a profound personal level that you are not the Pope, but you're not. So live with it,
So sit down.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you know what? And that's, I think, probably a good place to close out for the day. We will be back in some form on Saturday, or not Saturday, on Sunday at the usual time to talk about the last Sunday in Lent, which is Palm Sunday. So that's all. Bye.
Bye.